Hi, boys and girls. It's Monday morning, and I want to start with doing some shout outs. So, I noticed on iReady last week that I'm going to give you the first 10 people according to times that was spent, and then I'll give you the people. There were 11 of you that made 100s all last week in your iReady. The first number one person that had the most time in iReady reading last week was Caitlin Dixon with 4 hours and 45 minutes. So that's wonderful, Caitlin. Number two was Nola. Nola Ellis with 3 hours and 10 minutes. Way to go, Nola. Number three was Lily Chambers with 2 hours and 2 minutes. Good job, Lily. Number four, Landon Ashley with 1 hour and 40 minutes. Very good. Number five was, oh yes, here it is. Olivia Waltman with 1 hour and 28 minutes. Good job, Olivia. Number six was a tie between Kirsten Polk and Travis Harris. They both got 1 hour and 18 minutes. Number seven was Harper McCoy with 1 hour and 16 minutes. Number eight was also a tie. Jerry Randall and John Weston Egbert got 1 hour and 13 minutes. Number nine is Briley Chappis with 1 hour and 3 minutes. And number 10 is Cole Neal with 1 hour exactly. Now let me give you the 11 children that made a 100 last week on all of their lessons for iReady Reading. Wyatt did, Wyatt Carter, Lily, Briley, Greer, Georgia, Christian, Kirsten, Cole, Jerry, Sarah Lynn, and Donald. Way to go, guys. That's awesome. This week, if you can get on the computer, please try to do about 30 minutes every school day. So that should be about 2 hours and 30 minutes for the week, unless your parents want you to do more, or unless you just want to do more. Our lessons this week in iReady go along with the workbook pages that have been assigned to those that don't have computer access at home, and they're the ones about supporting inferences that are dealing with informational text. You may remember this little cartoon strip about the boy having hot sauce on his egg somehow. So that's the focus of this week's iReady. There is a new Mayan writing, which is what is one thing you'll really remember about this extra time you're getting to spend with your family. And if you can't get on the computer, you can just write a paragraph about that. Make sure it's concise, that you pick one thing you'll really remember, and give good supporting details about that. Concise just means clear and not just rambling on and on. Okay, making it not too short, but not too long either. Let's see. Then, as far as reading, I would love you to read at least 30 minutes every day. That's the most important thing you can do in my area. And that reminds me about AR. I had some really good AR students this past week. First, let me read you who has a 100 so far and their percentage correct. That's John Weston and Josie. Jerry Randall has a 98%. That is still very good. And Olivia has a 93% average correct. That is very good as well. The goal is 85, so if you have anything 85 or above, that's super. Landon has already taken 2 tests in AR. That's good. Josie has taken 3 tests so far. And Jerry, you've taken 5 tests. That's wonderful. Let's see. John Weston, you've taken 1 test. Olivia, you've taken 3. So that's great, guys. Keep up the good work. Remember, you can access AR through Maya now or just through Clever. It's been turned on for home use. And boys and girls, if you can't use the computer, it's okay. Just the main thing is reading. If you don't have a piece of paper, get a piece of paper out, because I'm going to quiz you again after our chapter on Little House in the Big Woods. Plus, if you did your workbook last week, instead of the iReady, please have it ready also so that we can check your answers from last week. Okay, here we go. Little House in the Big Woods. This chapter is called Sundays, and you can kind of tell from the picture that Sundays back then could have been a little different, and we'll hear about how it was different. Listen for these things. Here are some of the questions I'm going to ask. When did the family take their baths? In the winter, where did they get their bath water? Because remember, they didn't have running water back then. Number 3, listen to what Mary and Laura could do on Sundays. Could they run around and play? Number 4, Paul is going to tell a story about Grandpa when he was a little boy. So I want you to listen for what did he want to do really badly one Sunday. And then Grandpa and his brothers tried to do something very quietly when their dad fell asleep one afternoon. What happened with that? Were the parents more strict or less strict about Sunday in Grandpa's childhood time? Why did Paul spank Laura? And you'll see why I put quotation marks around that. How old is she now? What is she turning? What is one thing Laura got for her birthday? And what is the song that Paul was playing toward the end of the chapter that Mary and Laura keep watching his fingers to see when he pops the fiddle? There's actually a clue in that question. Okay, let's begin. Sundays. Now the winter seemed long. Laura and Mary began to be tired of staying always in the house. Especially on Sundays, the time went so slowly. Every Sunday, Mary and Laura were dressed from the skin out in their best clothes with fresh ribbons in their hair. They were very clean because they had their baths on Saturday night. In the summer, they were bathed in water from the spring. But in the winter time, Paul filled and heaped the wash tub with clean snow. And on the cook stove, it melted to water. Then close by the warm stove, behind a screen made of a blanket over 2 chairs, Ma bathed Laura, and then she bathed Mary. Laura was bathed first because she was littler than Mary. She had to go to bed early on Saturday nights with Charlotte, remember her rag doll? Because after she was bathed and put into her clean nightgown, Pa must empty the wash tub and fill it with snow again for Mary's bath. Then after Mary came to bed, Ma had her bath behind the blanket, and then Pa had his. And they were all clean for Sunday. On Sundays, Mary and Laura must not run or shout or be noisy in their play. Mary could not sew on her 9-patch quilt, and Laura could not knit on the tiny mittens she was making for baby Carrie. They might look quietly at their paper dolls, but they must not make anything new for them. They were not allowed to sew on doll clothes, not even with pins. They must sit quietly and listen while Ma read Bible stories to them, or stories about lions and tigers and white bears from Paul's big green book, The Wonders of the Animal World. They might look at pictures, and they might hold their rag dolls nicely and talk to them, but there was nothing else they could do. Laura liked best to look at the pictures in the big Bible with its paper covers. Best of all was the picture of Adam naming the animals. Adam sat on a rock, and all the animals and birds, big and little, were gathered around him, anxiously waiting to be told what kind of animals they were. Adam looked so comfortable. He did not have to be careful to keep his clothes clean because he had no clothes on. He wore only a skin around his middle. Did Adam have good clothes to wear on Sundays? Laura asked Ma. No, Ma said. Poor Adam. All he had to wear was skins. Laura did not pity Adam. She wished she had nothing to wear but skins. One Sunday after supper, she could not bear it any longer. She began to play with Jack, and in a few minutes she was running and shouting. Pa told her to sit in her chair and be quiet, but when Laura sat down, she began to cry and kicked the chair with her heels. I hate Sunday, she said. And here's a picture of her sitting in her chair and crying. Paul put down his book. Laura, he said sternly, come here. Her feet dragged as she went because she knew she deserved a spanking. But when she reached Paul, he looked at her sorrowfully for a moment and then took her on his knee and cuddled her against him. He held out his other arm to Mary and said, I'm going to tell you a story about when Grandpa was a boy. And here is the story of Grandpa's sled and the pig. Let me see if I can adjust this just a little bit. Okay. When your grandpa was a boy, Laura, Sunday did not begin on Sunday morning as it does now. It began at sundown on Saturday night. Then everyone stopped every kind of work or play. Supper was solemn. After supper, Grandfather's father read aloud a chapter of the Bible while everyone sat straight and still in his chair. Then they all knelt down and their father said a long prayer. When he said amen, they got up from their knees and each took a candle and went to bed. They must go straight to bed with no playing, laughing, or even talking. Sunday morning they ate a cold breakfast because nothing could be cooked on Sunday. Then they all dressed in their best clothes and walked to church. They walked because hitching up the horses was work and no work could be done on Sunday. They must walk slowly and solemnly, looking straight ahead. They must not joke or laugh or even smile. Grandpa and his two brothers walked ahead, and their father and mother walked behind them. In church, Grandpa and his brothers must sit perfectly still for 2 long hours and listen to the sermon. They dared not fidget on the hard bench. They dared not swing their feet. They dared not turn their heads to look at the windows or the walls or the ceiling of the church. They must sit perfectly motionless and never for one instant take their eyes from the preacher. When church was over, they walked slowly home. They might talk on the way, but they must not talk loudly, and they must never laugh or smile. At home, they ate a cold dinner which had been cooked the day before. Then all the long afternoon they must sit in a row on a bench and study their catechism, which is like Bible stories, until at last the sun went down and Sunday was over. Now Grandpa's home was about halfway down the side of a steep hill. The road went from the top of the hill to the bottom, right past the front door, and in winter it was the best place for sliding downhill that you can possibly imagine. One week, Grandpa and his two brothers, James and George, were making a new sled. They worked at it every minute of their playtime. It was the best sled they had ever made, and it was so long that all 3 of them could sit on it, one behind the other. They planned to finish it in time to slide downhill Saturday afternoon. For every Saturday afternoon, they had 2 or 3 hours to play. But that week, their father was cutting down trees in the big woods. He was working hard and kept the boys working with him. They did all the morning chores by lantern light, and were hard at work in the woods when the sun came up. They worked till dark, and then there were the chores to do, and after supper they had to go to bed so they could get up early in the morning. They had no time to work on the sled until Saturday afternoon. Then they worked on it just as fast as they could, but they didn't get it finished till just as the sun went down Saturday night. After the sun went down, they could not slide downhill, not even once. That would be breaking the Sabbath. So they put the sled in the shed behind the house to wait until Sunday was over. All the 2 long hours in church next day, while they kept their feet still and their eyes on the preacher, they were thinking about the sled. At home, while they ate dinner, they couldn't think of anything else. After dinner, their father sat down to read the Bible, and Grandpa and James and George sat as still as mice on their bench with their catechism, but they were thinking about the sled. The sun shone brightly and the snow was smooth and glittering on the road. They could see it through the window. It was a perfect day for sliding downhill. They looked at their catechism and they thought about the new sled, and it seemed that Sunday would never end. After a long time they heard a snore. They looked at their father and they saw that his head had fallen against the back of his chair and he was fast asleep. Then James looked at George, and James got up from the bench and tiptoed out of the room through the back door. George looked at Grandpa, and George tiptoed after James, and Grandpa looked fearfully at their father, but on tiptoe he followed George and left their father snoring. And here is Father. Grandpa, it says, was the youngest boy, so there he is. They're sneaking out. Do you think they'll make it? They took their new sled and went quietly up to the top of the hill. They meant to slide down just once. Then they would put the sled away and slip back to their bench and the catechism before their father woke up. James sat in front on the sled, then George, and then Grandpa because he was the littlest. The sled started, at first slowly, then faster and faster. It was running, flying down the long, steep hill. But the boys dared not shout. They must slide silently past the house without waking their father. There was no sound except the little whir of the runners on the snow and the wind running past. Then, just as the sled was swooping toward the house, a big black pig stepped out of the woods. He walked into the middle of the road and just stood there. The sled was going so fast it couldn't be stopped. There wasn't time to turn it. The sled went right under the hog and picked him up. With a squeal, he sat down on James, and he kept on squealing long and loud and shrill. Squee! Squee! And here's a picture of the hog on the sled with the 3 brothers. They flashed by the house, the pig sitting in front, then James, then George, then Grandpa, and they saw their father standing in the doorway looking at them. They couldn't stop, they couldn't hide. There was no time to say anything. Down the hill they went, the hog sitting on James and squealing all the way. At the bottom of the hill they stopped. The hog jumped off James and ran away into the woods, still squealing. The boys walked slowly and solemnly up the hill. They put the sled away. They sneaked into the house and slipped quietly to their places on the bench. Their father was reading his Bible. He looked up at them without saying a word. Then he went on reading, and they studied their catechism. But when the sun went down and the Sabbath day was over, their father took them out to the woodshed and tanned their jackets First James, then George, then Grandpa, and that means he gave them a spanking. So you see, Laura and Mary, Paul said, you might find it hard to be good, but you should be glad that it isn't as hard to be good now as it was when Grandpa was a boy. Did little girls have to be as good as that? Laura asked. And Ma said, it was harder for little girls because they had to behave like little ladies all the time, not only on Sundays. Little girls could never slide downhill like boys. Little girls had to sit in the house and stitch on samplers. Now run along and let Ma put you to bed, said Pa, and he took his fiddle out of its box. Laura and Mary lay in their trundled bed and listened to the Sunday hymns, for even the fiddle must not sing the weekday songs on Sundays. Rock of Ages cleft for me, Paul sang with the fiddle. Then he sang, shall I be carried to the skies on flowery beds of ease, while others fought to win the prize and sailed through bloody seas. Laura began to float away on the music, and then she heard a clattering noise, and there was Ma by the stove getting breakfast. It was Monday morning, and Sunday would not come again for a whole week. That morning when Paul came into breakfast, he caught Laura and said he must give her a spanking. First, he explained that today was her birthday, and she would not grow properly next year unless she had a spanking. And then he spanked so gently and carefully that it did not hurt a bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he counted and spanked slowly, and then one more spank for one to grow on. Then Paul gave her a little wooden man he had whittled out of a stick to be company for Charlotte. Ma gave her 5 little cakes, one for each year that Laura had lived with her and Paul. And Mary gave her a new dress for Charlotte, her little rag doll. Mary had made the dress herself when Laura thought she was sewing on her patchwork quilt. And that night, for a special birthday treat, Paul played Pop Goes the Weasel for her. He sat with Laura and Mary close against his knees while he played. Now watch, he said. Watch, and maybe you can see the weasel pop out this time. Then he sang, a penny for a spool of thread, another for a needle. That's the way the money goes. Laura and Mary bent close, watching, for they knew now was the time. Pop, said Paul's finger on the string. Goes the weasel, sang the fiddle plain as plain. And here are Laura and Mary trying to watch Paul's finger on the fiddle to see when it will pop. But Laura and Mary hadn't seen Paul's finger make the string pop. Oh, please, please do it again, they begged him. Paul's blue eyes laughed, and the fiddle went on while he sang. All around the cobbler's bench, the monkey chased the weasel. The preacher kissed the cobbler's wife. Pop goes the weasel. They hadn't seen Paul's finger that time either. He was so quick they could never catch him. So they went laughing to bed and lay listening to Pa and the fiddle singing. There was an old man and his name was Uncle Ned, and he died long ago, long ago. There was no wool on the top of his head in the place where the wool ought to grow. His fingers were as long as the cane in the brake, his eyes they could hardly see. And he had no teeth for to eat the hoe cake, so we had to let the hoe cake be. So hang up the shovel and the hoe, lay down the fiddle and the bow. There's no more work for old Uncle Ned, for he's gone where the good people go. The end. Okay, guys, get ready for your questions, and this time I'm going to give you a little bit of time to answer the question, and then I'll tell you the answer. So if you're not ready to hear the answer, just pause the video, okay? Number 1. When did Laura and the rest of the family take their bath? Here is the answer. on Saturday nights. Number 2, in winter, where did they get their bath water? Here is the answer. Paul brought in snow and they melted it on the cook stove. Number 3, could Mary and Laura run around and play on Sundays? Yes or no? The answer is no, they could not. They could sit and read, or they could sit and play quietly, but they couldn't run around and make loud noises on Sundays. Number 4, when Grandpa was a little boy, what did he want to do so badly one Sunday, along with his brothers? Okay, the answer is he wanted to slide down on the sled they had just built. Number 5, Grandpa and his 2 brothers tried to slide down the hill on their sled without making a noise. What happened that messed that plan up? The answer, a big hog got scooped up onto their sled and made lots of noise, right? Okay, number 6, were parents more strict or less strict about Sundays when Grandpa was a little boy? So you can just write more or less on number 6. More strict or less strict in Grandpa's childhood days? Okay, the answer, definitely more strict. The boys couldn't even smile or laugh on Sundays, and that would be very difficult. Okay, number 7, why did Paul spank Laura? The answer, because it was her birthday. Number 8, how old was she turning in the book on that birthday? The answer, she was turning 5. Number 9, what is one thing Laura got for her birthday? So this could be several different answers. And I think I'd better look too to make sure I give you all the possible answers. Okay, if you said Paul gave her a little wooden man that he had whittled out of a stick, that's correct. If you said 5 little cakes that Ma gave her, that was correct. Or a new dress for her rag doll that Mary gave her, that is also correct. Okay, number 10, the last one. What is the song that Paul was playing where Mary and Laura were trying to watch his finger pop on the fiddle? And the answer is Pop Goes the Weasel. Okay, guys, if you worked on the computer this week instead of the workbook, you can really sign off now. Right now, I'm just going to go over last week's workbook with the children that were working on that. Okay, if you're still with me, be sure you have your workbook. Let's go over these answers. And remember, this was our first